And now let the games begin!
Let's see what you do. Ethan Winters.
Get ready.
No!
Resident Evil Village was unleashed into the wild 2 weeks ago, which is just about enough time for many players to have completed at least one playthrough of the game's main campaign. As a direct continuation of Resident Evil 7, while also drawing on the franchise's often confusing 25-year lore, it might be that new fans of the series have been left slightly befuddled by Village's ambiguous final act and post-credits sequence. So, given that the door has been left very firmly open for a Resident Evil 9 and beyond, we've decided to break down all of the events of the ending to Resident Evil Village right here. Though if we've left anything out, or if you have any observations of your own to add, do let us know in the comments. And of course, a very big spoiler warning for the ending to Resident Evil Village and, really, all of the events of that game from here on out.
Alright, Ethan. Alright. I guess I owe you an explanation.
Okay. Where to start?
So, in order to properly explain the events of Village, we need to go all the way back to Resident Evil 7.
It's Ethan.
In that game, every man, Ethan Winters, sets off alone to a farmhouse situated in a remote swampland in Dulvey, Louisiana, after receiving a message from his wife Mia, who at that point had been missing for 3 years. Ethan is almost immediately assaulted by the father of the family living there, Jack Baker. And though he escapes that altercation, he is terrorized by the other family members while discovering that both they and Mia have been infected by a bioweapon that also happens to be a genetically modified little girl, who uses a psychotropic mold to control her victims' minds, resulting in the decline of their free will, hallucinations, mutations, and superhuman regenerative abilities. Turns out Mia was actually a covert agent responsible for transporting this little girl, called Evelyn, on behalf of the company that created her, until the ship they were traveling on crashed near the Baker home, leading Evelyn to infect everyone, including Mia, in an attempt to create the family she never got to have growing up in a shady laboratory. Long story short, Ethan overcomes the family, creates a serum to cure Mia and himself of the infection, kills Evelyn, and both Ethan and Mia are rescued by Chris Redfield and a military team operating under Blue Umbrella, a reformed arm of Umbrella Pharmaceuticals, which is just your commoner garden, evil corporation bent on controlling the world through nefarious means.
We moved here so that she wouldn't have to deal with any of that, remember?
There's nothing wrong with my memory.
So, following on from the events of RE7, Resident Evil Village picks up 3 years later. The Winterses are in hiding under Chris Redfield's protection, they've moved to Eastern Europe, and they have a new baby daughter named Rosemary. Or Rose. All seems lovely and hopeful. I mean, Ethan and Mia have some arguments about remembering their past or letting it go or whatever, but otherwise, it's all good. Until Chris Redfield and his private military team known as the Hound Wolf Squad show up unannounced, assassinate Mia and abduct Rose and Ethan by force. They're stuffed into the back of a truck and Ethan comes to when that truck crashes, though everyone else is nowhere to be found. And so Ethan fights his way through werewolves, vampires, possessed dolls, giant fishmen, and mechanized zombies in an effort to get his daughter back, even after he finds out she's been spliced into 4 separate flasks ahead of a ceremony that's very important to the self-proclaimed ruler of the area, Mother Miranda. The local villagers all worship her as their protector, but somewhat unsurprisingly, it turns out she's not quite as benevolent as they might think.
Stop! Mother Miranda! Ah! Hey! Who was... What was that?
So more in turn is due.
Eventually, Ethan discovers that the Mia from the start of the game was not really Mia at all, but Miranda, who was trying to get close enough to steal baby Rose. Her plan was to use Rose as a host body to revive her own long-deceased daughter Eva, who died about 100 years prior to the events of the game of the Spanish flu. At the time, Miranda was so heartbroken over her daughter's death that she wandered into a cave to die. But instead, she inadvertently discovered a powerful fungal hive mind known as the megamycete. Miranda was infected by and entered into a symbiotic relationship with the megamycete, which had the ability to absorb the memories of and take the shape of any living creatures it encountered. And thus, Miranda is an accomplished shapeshifter. From all this, Miranda gets the idea that she could effectively bring her Eva back to life, but she just needed the perfect host body to be her vessel. And so, for 100 years, Miranda has been infecting her local populace with a parasitic offshoot of the megamycete known as Cado, testing each individual's responses in the search for a host that could bring Eva back to her. In the course of this research, she found some individuals who responded more positively to the fungus and made them lords of the area, yet even they were deemed not good enough for her daughter. At some point, Miranda was contacted by a secretive collective known as the Connections, and she provided them with samples of this fungus, or mold, and Eva's DNA, which they used to create the bioweapon Evelyn, setting up the events of Resident Evil 7. The mold of that game is essentially the same as the power behind Village. Miranda still wasn't satisfied with Evelyn as a vessel for Eva's birth, but when Rosemary Winters was born, the Connections informed Miranda of the baby, and Miranda sensed potential in her as a baby born from individuals who had already had exposure to the mold. Also, over the course of her 100-year search, it's revealed that Miranda meets with and inspires one Oswell E. Spencer, a founder of the infamous Umbrella Pharmaceuticals. Spencer met with and became Miranda's apprentice, learning all about viruses through her and the potential of using them on humans. This inspired Spencer to start research that would eventually lead him to the T-virus, though he would part ways with Miranda as she sought to bring back a single dead person, whereas he wanted to control the world with his creations. Spencer tells Miranda he'll use the design he first saw in the Village as an inspiration for his company's logo. It turns out that in many ways, Miranda is the origin for a lot of important elements in the entire Resident Evil series.
Miranda! You coward! Come out and face me!
Don't worry. Your death will come quick.
Back to Ethan Winters though, and when he finally comes to confront Miranda, she simply rips his heart right out. The end? Well, no. In his death throes of sorts, Ethan experiences a vision of Evelyn, who tells him he's been dead all along. He'd been infected with the mold, or Evelyn's so-called E-virus, after being killed by Jack Baker in their first meeting during the previous game. So this all goes a long way to explaining why Ethan was able to shake off even the most life-threatening of injuries with nothing more than first aid med and a can-do attitude. The mold had retained Ethan's memories and reformed him in his image, though it doesn't quite explain why the serum taken in the first game didn't cause him to crumble away, or how he managed to father a child. Though maybe the less we think about that little detail, the better.
No way.
God damn it, when does it end?
Chris Redfield, who had been tracking Miranda's movements ever since she got in touch with the Connections, was tipped off about her plan to kidnap Rose. That's why Chris broke into the Winters' home, shot up the intruder he knew wasn't the real Mia, and took Ethan and Rose into custody. Not telling Ethan this plan, in a half-baked attempt at not getting him involved, was a big mistake, as the game itself admits. But when Chris and his squad find out Miranda survived the assassination attempt, they return to the village to finish the job. As Ethan is chatting to Evelyn in the sort of afterlife, Chris rescues the real Mia, who is locked up to be experimented on, though the jury's still out on whether she's really alive or just a mold copy as well at this point. Anyway, despite now knowing he's been dead this whole time, Ethan comes to just long enough to defeat Miranda, rescuing Rose from becoming a vessel and putting her back together again, though it's never really explained why Miranda separated her into parts just to put her back together again, by the way. His moldy body now dying, because apparently there's only so much punishment it can take, Ethan volunteers to stay behind in the village and sacrifice himself to detonate the payload Chris attached to the megamycete source, while Chris, Mia, and baby Rose escape in a helicopter, as per Resident Evil tradition. Once everyone is on board, one of Chris's associates reveals that the BSAA, who had also been in the area, had deployed bioweapons, or, well, zombies, instead of living ground troops, perhaps setting them up as a brand new umbrella in disguise. The credits roll as Rogue Agent Chris decides the Hound Wolf Squad are going to pay the BSAA a visit to find out what they're really up to. Probably nothing good, is my guess.
Pick up the rest of the squad. Plot a course for BSAA Europe HQ.
Anyway, Resident Evil Village's post-credit scene shows an adult, or at least a teenage Rosemary, taking the bus to visit Ethan's grave on his birthday. Rose is seen wearing Ethan's jacket, that he gave to her right before his death, as well as Mia's wedding ring, which we glimpsed earlier at the Beneviento compound. Rose is collected at Ethan's graveside by a BSAA agent, who doesn't know when to keep his mouth shut. And the exchange implies they're keeping very close tabs on Rose's development as a bioweapon, though Chris is still somewhat involved in her life as well.
You're needed, Evelyn.
Don't you ever call me that again.
Whoa, it's just a joke, Rose.
I can show you things even Chris doesn't know I can do.
As the car drives off, we see a figure approaching from a distance. Clever players have activated photo mode and zoomed in to confirm that this figure is indeed a jacketless character model for Ethan. But what this could mean is open to interpretation. If Rose is a part of the mold hive mind, it would make sense that she can hear and see him just as Ethan could hear and see Evelyn. Is he perhaps taking on a ghostly mentor role in the afterlife? But then, why would Capcom very clearly state that the father's story is now finished if they plan to bring him back in any capacity later in the series? And while the ending does seem to hint at Rose now taking on a protagonist role in the story, would Capcom really jump so far forward in time in the series, potentially abandoning quite a few plot lines and characters that would have to move forward by perhaps 20 years? Will we see the results of that investigation into the BSAA that Chris mentioned at the end of Village? Why is he apparently working with them again in the future? Is Capcom really intent on entering into a new generation for the series? What would that even look like with a superpowered character like Rose? Well, with RE9 likely a little while off, there is plenty of time for speculation, so get yours in now. Will we see Rose taking on the BSAA and carrying on her parents' legacy? Are Ada and Jill and Claire and Leon and all of our other favourite characters going to be involved somehow in the franchise's future? Did Chris teach Rose how to punch boulders like a pro? Check out some of our other RE Village videos if you haven't already. Subscribe for plenty more gaming content. We have a new video go live each and every day. And until then, thanks for watching this one. Bye!